The standard says you've got to have the name on it, you've got to have the manufacturer on it, you've got to have the batch on it so that there is a traceability backwards.
Welcome back to Talking Fire. We are now talking cable. For the FDIA, to be quite honest, has been quite controversial. There's been a lot of back and forth regarding cable suppliers, who's bringing cable in. I think a lot of people saw the opportunity when there was the change from FR20, which I think used to probably cost like R2 a meter, up into the PH30s and the PH120s. And how to identify whether your cable is properly approved, what it needs to be approved to, and where to use it. So just to touch on, PH30 is a 30-minute burn cable. So the test requires that cable to withstand 800 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes or more without creating a short circuit.
With extra bits and pieces on top of that, you've got the mechanical test. As it's burning, you've got a mechanical arm that bangs every couple of minutes, and also you've got water sprayers on it. So yeah, it's SANS 50 200 is the specification for testing the cable, and it's reasonably intense.
And then PH120 is obviously 120 minutes, so 2 hours. I think myself and Clive have personally witnessed some of these tests, and to see the cable still operating under those conditions is it's quite impressive, to say the least. You wouldn't think it would last that long. But just to jump to the point, is this cable needs to be approved.
Yeah, so what's that, like Hilton was saying, what happened in the past is that 2010, we looked at cable at the FDIA and said, well, let's test them, because nobody could give us any test results. So we took a couple of pieces of cable, went off to a test facility. They put it up, and PH30 lasted for the 30 minutes. FR20 lasted, I think, in steel conduit about a minute and a half, which was like possibly not what we require. So what we done is then we started investigating and so on. The standard for PH30, as Hilton says, it's got to be tested according to 50-200. They're very specific. You've got to have a ribbon burner of this length. You've got to have it in this facility. You've got a mechanical arm that bangs on the cable. And this is all to simulate a cable in a fire condition. What's going to happen then is it also asks for batch testing. So I cannot go and have a piece of cable tested and then say, all right, I've got a fire certificate for the next 20 years, because your batches have to be tested. That's the standard says so. We're getting cable. In the past, we had some cables coming in that I said I needed a cable which is PH30, and the guy go, all right, cool, I've got a printer, print PH30 on it, and away you go. So there was a lot of backwards and forwards, and it was probably due to misunderstanding and not really looking at the standard and what's required. So the standard says you've got to have the name on it, you've got to have the manufacturer on it, you've got to have the batch on it so that there is a traceability backwards. What we do as contractors is we actually make a note of the batch of cable that we're getting and being installed, so that if there is ever a problem, we can go back and say, this is the cable that was used in that building. What else is there? Obviously 120 should be used more for the evacuation side of it, or for your sounders and so on. So it's logical. If you've got a multi-story building, up the riser you would use a 120, because that's the main backbone of the system, and as you go onto the floors, use the PH30 for your cable. It is dependent on what the client's requirement is, and also looking at 10139, it does say that this is the cable that's specified for that.
Yeah, and just to touch on the fact, should you buy cable, your supplier should be able to provide you with a batch testing certificate, as well as the information and the approval of the cable, because not approved cable that doesn't tick all the boxes leads to a non-compliant system, and that once again can fall back on the contractor.
Yeah, the contractor needs to cover his ass and say, all right, I've got all of this in place. And it is a bit of a pain to do all of that. And sometimes just buy the cable from Quis at the corner cafe and it's fine. But yeah, you ultimately, as a contractor, you're responsible, because you've told the end user, the client, your client, that you're doing a competent system or a compliance system. And yeah, make sure that it's the right stuff that you're installing.
Yeah, and just to finally touch on it, where the difference between solid core and stranded core is purely contractor preference.
Yeah.
The standards don't change at all. Whether it's 1 mil, 1.5,
1.5.
whether it's stranded or solid, it's up to the contractor to decide what they think is best.
Obviously, it's easier to work with a stranded cable. It's soft. It's easier to pull.
Yeah, easier to
sometimes.
bend.
Yeah, it's yeah.
But the
what's
standard
available as well.
and the standards are the same. But yeah, just make sure that your supplier has all their documentation just to cover yourself. And make sure your end user should, in the case of a fire, that once again, we protect property, protect life, and do what the systems are set out to do.
Yeah.